everyone, and welcome to WebDev Lessons. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bruce Johnson, and I am the WebDev instructor for the WebDev Lessons website. I started the website, and I'm working on its content, and I'm designing all of it. So we have a JavaScript course, hopefully a CSS course will be coming out by the time you're watching this, and this is our HTML course, so we're going to cover all things HTML. If you're watching this video, hopefully you are very curious about HTML, what it is, what it does, how to use it. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. One of the first and biggest things we're going to talk about today is the concept of files and folders and folder hierarchy, and how folders are inside of folders and files are in those folders, and how all that works together, and how you can read from files, and how all these files stack up together and work together to build your website. We're also going to talk about file extensions, and a file is different from a folder, and we're going to talk about all these different things. Now, if you already know a lot of that stuff, you can skip a little bit ahead in the video to the next time you see me. It's going to be after we've already talked about all that stuff. So if you're already familiar with folders and stuff like that, you can go ahead and move on. But I would recommend you at least skim over it and watch it, because we are going to talk about some HTML specific things and some website specific things as well. So it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and watch, but if you think you already know what folders and files are and how to work with them, you can just go ahead and move on to the next time you see me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so right now I am on my desktop. So if you're watching this and you'd like to follow along, which by the way is a great idea, I highly encourage you follow along with what I'm doing, you'll want to go to your desktop. So what we're going to do right now is we are going to build a folder, and we're going to talk a little bit about folder hierarchy and how all that works. So I'm working on a Mac right now. As you can see, if you're working on Windows or Linux, your process should be roughly the same. If it's not, you might want to research or Google what your question is, and if you can't find the answers to your questions there, well then you can simply pull up the WebDev Lessons website. You can go to the contact page and you can either send me an email or join the Slack group, which is probably the best way to get some help, because there will be other students in the Slack group as well who might be able to answer your question if I'm not available. Otherwise, you can just send me an email, but I would recommend doing both. That way you're sure you get your question answered. Alright, so we're back on our desktop. What we're going to do is we're going to right-click on the desktop and we're going to hit New Folder. Now what I have on my desktop is a brand new folder. So with this new folder, we are actually going to name it, since it's untitled, and we're going to call this Exercise. Exercise 1. Hit enter or click anywhere else and you will now have yourself a folder. We are going to open that folder, and notice I have set my Mac to tell me what our path is. So this is a great time to actually talk about folder paths or file paths. And if that word's foreign to you, you might want to pay close attention to this particular portion of the video. Paths are very important, and you're going to come across them a lot in any programming language you decide to code in. So with HTML in particular, it's important to know what you're linking to, and you won't know what to link to unless you know what your path is. So if this looks familiar to you, that's probably because you've used a web browser before. Web browsers use paths to find all of the things on the web, but they're called URLs. And that's what we have here. It looks pretty similar, hopefully, to this. So there you can see the path of my folder here, and here you can see my URL or the path of my website. So think of paths like URLs if that helps. If that doesn't help, just think of it like this. The thing that's inside of here, or this particular folder, is inside of this folder. And then this folder and this folder are inside of this folder here. And both of those folders are inside of this folder. And all three of those folders, including this one, are inside of this folder. So everything is nested. That's called nested. Things inside of other things, like Russian dolls, if you've ever seen that. So we are inside of our exercise 1 folder, and you can see my path here. Alright, if that was a review for you, that should have been a pretty good review of what folders are and like folder hierarchies and folders inside of folders. And that should have cleared up a bit of confusion when I mentioned things like nesting and stuff like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually start moving into a little bit of HTML type code. We're going to talk a little bit about file extensions. We're also going to move into opening up stuff with your IDE. So again, if you have not watched that YouTube video that is linked underneath this video on my website, watch that YouTube video. That will show you how to install your IDE. That's also going to talk to you about GitHub, and GitHub is very, very important. That's where you're going to find all the exercises for this lesson and every lesson on the WebDev Lessons lesson page. All the classes are going through GitHub for their exercises. So if you're not familiar with GitHub, watch that video that I linked underneath. I take a long time, I think about 20 minutes, talking about GitHub. And I also show you how to install your IDE. If you have an IDE already or you don't know what that is, again, just go watch that video. That will clear up a lot of confusion. And like I said before, if your confusion is not cleared up and you have confusion, you're lost, you're confused about something, anything, feel free to definitely send me a message on Slack or on email. You can find all that information on the contact page. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into some file extensions and some HTML code. Now, what we're going to do is we are actually going to open up this folder using our IDE. You should have already watched the video that is underneath of this video on the WebDev Lessons website. I'm going to show you an example of what it might look like. This is not what it will actually look like, but if you open up your HTML section, you're going to see a list of all the HTML lessons. Underneath of this particular video, you'll see a button that will say YouTube video. You're going to want to click that and watch the video up until 16:16. And again, you watch it up until this particular point in the video. And you can watch further, of course, but that is where we are going to be watching. That information is required. You must watch that in order to continue with this lesson. So maybe pause the video right now, watch that, and come back to here. What you should have done in that video is a couple things. You should have familiarized yourself with GitHub. You should also have familiarized yourself with an IDE, which I have installed, and I showed you how to install Sublime Text in that video. So again, if you haven't seen that video, go ahead and watch it, or if you have this IDE installed and you're familiar with GitHub already, you can continue with this video. So we are going to go ahead and open up Sublime Text. Now we're going to go to File. We're going to say Open. And I'm going to go onto my desktop here. And I'm going to find my exercise folder. And I'm going to click Open. So now you can see we have exercise 1, which is that file we created. It's open now in our IDE, which is good. This is what we want. Now what we're going to do is we are going to say New File. And we've now created a file. And we're going to hit Control S or Command S. We're going to save it, and we're going to say we want to save this on our desktop in that new file we created. So if I can find that new file, there it is. And we're going to name this index.html. Now, before we move on, I do want to talk a little bit about what this .html is. This is called a file extension. This means that our file is of type HTML. So this is an HTML file. This tells our browser what to look for when it sees this file. It knows that inside of it must be HTML code. This also tells our IDE that we are going to be writing HTML code in here, and as you can see, it has labeled that as so. We're going to make 2 other files, and I meant to click New File, and I hit Open, so let's do New File. And we are also going to save this, and we're going to call this scripts.js, and there's our JS file. And we're going to save that there, and you'll see it gives us a different symbol telling us that this is a JavaScript file. And then we're going to create a new file, and again, Control S, and we're going to call this styles.css. And we're going to save, and as you can see, it knows that it's something else. This is our HTML, and it sees these as 2 other files. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create the basics of our HTML document. And we're just going to briefly touch over what they are. We're going to talk about them more in depth in the next lesson. We're going to start, and you can really just follow along with me. And you don't have to understand what any of this is yet. Just go ahead and follow along. And we are going to capitalize this. I apologize. We're going to say doc type HTML. And then we're going to enter, and we're going to say HTML, and we are going to end HTML. And you can see my editor has already ended it for me. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to do head, and then we are going to do body. And you can see if I just start typing, and I'll go back a little bit. If I just start typing this, you see my editor is trying to tell me, hey, we think we know what you're doing. Do you want us to continue with this and build a body tag? Which we do. So we simply hit enter. And it builds the rest of us, or it builds the rest of the tag for us, which is very, very handy. So now we have what is now called the skeleton of our HTML page. So we have HTML and HTML. We have head, and we'll get to that later, and we have body, which is where you'll be putting all of your code. So I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with this hierarchy of tags. We're going to be talking about them more in the next video, but just kind of get used to seeing things like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger for now so you can see what's going on here. And we've got two things with each of these tags. We've got our start tag, and we've got our end tag. Notice the only difference really between the two is that our end tag has a slash on it. And you can see that for all of these. Head, this one just has a slash, and that makes it different. HTML, again, just a slash, indicating that this is our end tag, this is our start tag. For now on, I'm just going to reference them as pairs, so you'll hear me reference the body tag, and that means put it inside of both of them. If I say inside the body tag, I'm talking about putting your code right here where this bit of gibberish is. So that is inside of our body tag. Oh, apologize for that. This is inside of our body tag. Here's our head tag, and if we wanted to put code inside of our head tag, here is the code inside of our head tag. So hopefully this makes sense, and you understand briefly. Again, you don't have to completely understand this, but this should begin to make some sense to you. We have a start tag and an end tag. Most tags you'll encounter within this course have a start and an end tag. Some of them may not have an end tag, but we'll get to that later. For now, assume every tag you're dealing with so far has a start tag and an end tag. Alright, so we did cover a decent amount of material in this lesson. Let's just do a brief recap and talk about everything we've talked about so far. We talked about folder hierarchies and how folders are nested inside of other folders, and we didn't really talk about how that's used yet, but that's going to become very apparent throughout the rest of this course. We also talked about file extensions and how we use a .html extension for our HTML files, and that indicates to the browser and to our editor that we are using an HTML file and we want to write code that is HTML code. We also talked about .css and .js. We're not going to use that until you start the CSS class and the JavaScript class. We also got into a little bit of HTML. We talked about the bare bones skeleton of our HTML website, which is comprised of your doc type HTML, then your start HTML and your end HTML. And inside of those two, we have our head, which we'll talk about later, and our body, which we're going to use a lot. And that's where you're going to put most of your code in this class. So now we're going to move on to lesson 2, which should be right below this video on the WebDev Lessons website. And if you're confused at this point, stop, rewatch the video, don't move forward. If you're still confused after watching this video again, contact me and I'll be sure to try and clear up as much as I possibly can so that you're not moving forward with a lot of confusion. Okay, good luck, and we will see you in the next lesson.